All right.
All right, well, hello everyone, and thank you for joining us today. Today, our topic is Executive Search 101, How to Choose an Agency Partner. This has generated a lot of interest from our clients and candidate network, and we hope you pick up a thing or two today during our session. A few housekeeping items that we'll go through first. We want this to be a really beneficial session for everyone involved, and so there will be a Q&A portion along the way. So just enter your question in the chat feature on the right, and our moderator will review and publish as we go. And you can like and upvote them so that we can try to make the most popular ones as decided by you. So we'll do our best to answer as many questions as possible. But if we don't get to your question, you can always email us after the session, and we'll be sure to answer your question then. As a reminder, if you need to leave early, we are recording this, and we'll be sending the recording to everyone who has registered. So I'd like to start off by introducing myself and GeForce. Let's see, I'm not delayed a little bit. There we go. Okay, so my name is Kelly Rubach, and I am the head of executive search here at GeForce Life Sciences. I have over 10 years of experience in the industry, with experience in both consulting and executive search services. Previous to this career, I held multiple positions in healthcare, hospitality, and the services industry. And what I've done is combine those two careers to provide 20 years of high quality delivery. But enough about me, let's talk about GeForce. So GeForce is a nationwide recruiting firm. We're really rooted in servicing life sciences, and that includes pharmaceutical companies, biotechs, and medical devices. Our executive search division, which I lead, we really try to work with a limited amount of clients to provide a targeted search with a concierge approach. I call it the private jet of executive search because we work with a limited amount of clients on a first-class basis. And as I always say, all the plane puns are intended. I tell my clients to think of GeForce when a role deserves first-class attention. We get to where you need to go on a faster basis with first-class service. And we work across multiple different departments, including research and discovery, R&D, and commercial. And for the most part, we work on director level and above positions. In addition to our executive search division, GeForce has a few additional divisions, including our staffing division, our FSP division, as well as our global audit division, where we can conduct over 1,000 audits annually. We really do this by matching highly targeted consultants to executives' needs by blending the best of the traditional models, really blending speed, experience, and a targeted search to bring you what you need instead of what's available on the bench. So next, I'd love to introduce our speakers today. I'll start off by introducing someone I consider a friend and a great colleague and a joy to work with, Anita Carvalho. Anita comes with 25 years of experience, and she's currently consulting with Generation Bio. She provides talent acquisition support to growing biotech and pharmaceutical companies. She has extensive experience assisting companies who are preparing for big growth initiatives. And she has a really impressive track record of companies that she's worked with. Anita, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Kelly. Really glad to be here with you today.
Thank you. And next up, another great friend of mine in the industry, Jody Crowley. Jody is a human resources consultant to local biotech companies through her consulting firm, JHR Solutions. She comes with 20 years of experience and provides HR support to enable small startup companies to build their foundation. She has extensive experience assisting companies who are just getting started, going from private to public, and establishing the culture that goes along with those changes. She also has worked with a really impressive track record of companies. Jody, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Kelly. Look forward to this.
Definitely. So today we're going to chat with Anita and Jody about how to choose and evaluate agency partners. So just a little context for our presentation. Picking an agency to work with on a role for your company not only represents you, but also your brand. And it's someone you're going to need to depend on for weeks, maybe even months, until you find the right candidate to grow your team. What we wanted to do today was really unpack some of the topics and issues to think about and consider when you're choosing your next agency partner. Both Jody and Anita have experience choosing partners as well as recommending partners to their colleagues in the industry. So they'll be able to give us some great insight on what to look for and what not to look for, because not all agencies are created equal. And I do believe that not all agencies are meant for every position out there. So let's just jump right into the first question. The first question we have here today is, when should I engage a firm in a search versus hire or expand my internal talent acquisition or HR team?
So I can jump in and add some color to that. So a lot of my client base are small startup companies, perhaps starting with 2 or 3 employees and then growing. So I tend to start off using search firms because we don't have the resources internally to help source candidates and fill our open positions. The other aspect is as the companies start to grow, we start merging more towards employee referrals and then discussing when is the right time to pull in the agencies. So from my perspective, I start with the company size and then the number of positions that we have to recruit for. So if we're in high growth mode, we may add agencies much faster.
That's really helpful. And I'm typically brought in, at least for the past 10 to 12 years, my focus has really been on organizations that are building. So really anticipating high growth initiatives. Maybe it's to launch a product or to expand a large division, like maybe a whole development function or something like that. So typically I'll be brought in just before that point so I can kind of come in, hit the ground running right away and really just make an impact on the staffing initiatives for the organization. With respect to going out to a search firm, normally what we try to do as an in-house recruiter is take some time to sort of fill the position on our own. So this is a little bit nebulous, but sometimes I'll say, just give me 2 weeks if the team is really anxious to go out to an outside firm, or give me 4 weeks or something like that, so I can build up the pool of candidates and kind of the pool of talent for the organization. But it really sort of varies, and it can depend on the volume we have open at the time, how many recruiters we have, what the resources are, how high touch the environment is, and then sort of the level of customer service that you're trying to provide to the hiring leaders as well.
And Anita, I know you mentioned in the past, if there was a group of the same position open, that might be a time when, you might need to be taking care of some of the strategic positions. Maybe talk a little bit about that.
Absolutely. So a few examples of that. It's funny, since we discussed that yesterday, Kelly, I actually thought of 2 additional examples. So the one I had provided yesterday, we had a number of very high level, sort of director level and above roles open at one given organization where I worked. And at the same time, we also were trying to find administrative assistants. So I want to say we had 4 administrative executive admin openings, and those can be very time consuming in the sense that you can't always get fit, almost never can you get fit, frankly, from looking at a resume, and you really want to get a sense of what the person is like and will they be a fit for the group and the person they're supporting and the organization. So in that instance, we actually took all of the administrative roles, gave them to one agency, and that enabled me to focus, if you will, on some of the higher level positions, those sort of director and above roles. And as I mentioned, I did think of 2 other examples since we connected on this yesterday. And one was a medicinal chemistry expansion I had at one point, and then another one was a biostatistician expansion. And in both of those examples, I also worked the role myself, but I partnered with my outside agency recruiter to give me some assistance and kind of supplement the work that I was doing.
Definitely. Great.
Just one thing to add too is the complexity of the position and the market. So if you think of regulatory affairs as an example, that is a really tough market, even without this craziness that's going on right now in the market. Prior to this all happening, regulatory was hard to fill. So kind of having that, the know-how and understanding that market will often tell you when it's time to pull in an agency as well. So.
Yeah, definitely. And that really kind of segues into our next question of what roles should I outsource to an agency? And so you mentioned regulatory. Is there other reasons or kind of positions, certain positions or roles that you would outsource to one agency or another?
There are, yes. No, it's a great question. As Jody mentioned, I almost always go out to agency, and there is a specific recruiter I work with in each of these spaces. But when I get a regulatory opening and when I get a quality assurance opening, I almost always go right out to agencies. Another challenging functional area could be MDs. So on the clinical development side, that can be tough. And you sort of want to go with a firm that has a benchmark of strong medical directors and MDs that they can just kind of easily go to. Whereas for us, if we're starting the search from scratch, it can be really challenging. I will say, once you work with a firm and you get really comfortable with them, I know I've been doing this for almost 25 years, but I started as a headhunter myself and an agency recruiter. So for me, I think when I am chatting with a potential partner initially, I feel very comfortable that I know what questions to ask because I've done the role. And then when I am comfortable with that firm, I really truly bring them with me wherever I go. And even with my colleagues in the industry, I'll definitely recommend these firms that I've had good luck with. I know with Kelly, we've been working together now. I think it's gracious. I want to say it's about 10 years, maybe a little bit more. And I even remember our first call together, but I've brought you with me everywhere I've gone since, Kelly, and highly recommended you to colleagues who have done the same. And they've even been at multiple organizations over time, and you've worked with them in several different places.
Well, and thank you. And we love going everywhere with you. You're a great person to work with. And I think it goes both ways. From the agency perspective too, that we want to work with great people and great clients and people that have a great process. So thank you for doing that as well.
Happy to. And the only other thing I would add to this, and then I'll turn it over to Jody, would be sometimes hiring managers will have a preference for an agency, and they've worked with them before, or maybe the agency has even placed them themselves in the role, which is something I'm experiencing right now, and they really want to work with that agency. So sometimes that will even be the deciding factor.
Mm-hmm.
Great. So I'll just add to that too, as I mentioned earlier, being in kind of the smaller startup environment and not having the resources, we tend to, as I mentioned, use agencies a lot more than the budget may want us to use them, but it certainly helps us with getting the roles filled more timely. And to Anita's point, just those higher touch and harder to fill, so MDs, any specialized roles. And then the other aspect is if it's a position open due to attrition, sometimes speed is a factor. And that position may just be like, you know what, we probably can do this internally, but let's get the speed under our belt and get this done quickly. So those are kind of the things I start to think about when we're thinking about which positions to outsource. And again, it's not having any talent acquisition resources in the positions that I'm generally in until we get a little bit bigger. So.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I think that also kind of dovetails into our next question of should we use internal network employee referral programs before going out to an agency? So kind of like you said, Jody, if it's an attrition or something where you've got a sudden gap, you might be able to fill it internally. You might be able to use your employee referral program, but timing is an issue. But is there a time and a place for this program, before going to an agency?
Definitely. I've seen employee referral programs work really well. At one organization where I worked, this is really the only time I had ever seen that, but the employee referral, so the rate of hires coming from employee referrals, or rather I should say the percentage, was up in the 40%. It was like between 43 and 48% in terms of where we got our employees from. So I've seen it go really well. One thing I think I would just kind of recommend caution around, or maybe just some mindfulness around, one organization where I worked, there was a specific function within that organization and the function grew very quickly. And we ended up with a situation where we had a number of people from the same organization, because of course when one person joined, they brought someone else over, and we ended up with probably a little bit more, I think, than we planned on. And it's probably not the most healthy ratio when a candidate is coming in to interview and they say to you, every single person on the interview team that I'm meeting with today comes from this one organization. So if a candidate picks up on that, we just want to be sort of mindful and maybe a step ahead of the curve before kind of allowing it to go down that path, I guess I would say.
Yeah. And I think to add to that is just when you're at these smaller companies, it is sometimes harder to get the network flowing, because you do end up in that situation where it's everybody from the one company or what have you, or you have one very active person who's like, oh, I know this person and I know that person, the extroverts, right, that are networking with everybody. And it certainly is a slower process and not as successful as your 40% there. I'm very impressed, Anita. And then the other aspect of employee referrals or using an internal TA function is, again, just that the speed of getting people through the door. It's at these small companies very challenging, both from a resourcing the candidates, but then schedules are insane and getting the interview process through and so forth. So having a partner agency is often makes it go a little faster. So
definitely. And so it sounds like you might be able to use these or have to in some cases use these in tandem.
Exactly.
An agency and a referral program.
Definitely.
That's
absolutely.
Great.
Many times, Kelly, the quality of the hires that you get from employee referrals and the longevity is high when you're tracking them. But I would say it's one tool, as you alluded to, sort of in your toolkit, if you will.
Mm-hmm. Great. Yeah, I think any agency would respect that as well. Working in tandem with that. I think the ultimate goal of any agency should be that you have the best resource possible for your team. And should the search not work out because you found someone through an internal referral, hopefully you'll call that agency back, and so the relationship will still go on. But of course, I know when I'm working on a position, we want, whoever ends up with the right candidate, but we want you to have the right person for a long time.
Mm.
So let's move on to the next question. Let's see here. This one is, how do I choose one agency over another?
So for me, it's very important to, and you were talking about this a little bit in that last statement, Kelly, is the relationship with the agency and the people that we're working with. So I view it as an extension of our HR team. So any agency that I engage with has to really be attached at the hip, essentially, with our HR teams. And when they're talking to candidates, they literally sound like they're sitting in our office, in a chair, ingrained in our culture. So for me, that's a huge part of it. I tend to lean towards the smaller boutique firms because that is where you get a little bit more of that personal touch from the agency side, having them align with our brand and so forth. So I think that's the key components that are important to me. I don't know if you have anything to add to that, Anita.
I would agree with all of that. And I do tend to go to the smaller boutique firms as well. And I've worked with both. And I've actually worked with both and worked for both. And I found that you just get such a great level of customer service from the smaller firms. So that's always sort of my go-to. But as I mentioned earlier, I definitely develop a relationship with the agency recruiter that I work with. And I do take them with me from sort of organization to organization in the way that I would, I guess, sort of pick them as well. And I think we might have said this a little bit earlier, but from an area of expertise standpoint. So whether it's regulatory affairs or quality or medical directors or whatever it is, if the agency focuses in that area, that tends to be really, really, really helpful for you. And one agency, I remember an example not all that long ago, an agency that I was working with, and we got the candidate to the offer stage, and it was looking really good. And the candidate said, at this point in the process, who should I follow up with? Should I follow up with you or the agency partner? And in this instance, I said, either way, it really truly doesn't matter, because the communication is so seamless that if you say something to the recruiter, you're saying it to me, and vice versa, because that's how kind of closely we communicate with one another.
Seamless communication. That's really wonderful.
Definitely, yes.
And I think,
go ahead, Jody.
I was just gonna say on this topic too, is just like, how do I choose one agency over the other? It's how do I weed out the agencies I don't want to work with, right? And for me, it's I don't know how many people out there have this happening to them on a multiple times a day basis, but hiring managers send me these emails that they get that say, I have this candidate, here's their profile, it's the exact copy and paste bullet list of our job description. Aren't they perfect? Can we call this agency and get that person in? So to me, that's no, I'm not calling that agency. That person doesn't really exist. So it's really, for me, it's kind of filtering through those aspects. And then on your slide here, Kelly, you've got the larger firm aspect, and to the point Anita made, that personal touch just gets lost completely. And I think my preference is always to work with an agency that has that full desk support. Because I feel like their representation of our company and our culture and our brand is a lot more in sync than dealing with those other agencies that are not full desk. So,
Is there a time and a place where you'd use a large firm over a boutique company?
Maybe for C-level. What about you, Jody? Like a C-level position?
Yeah, and how large though? Like, I'm not going to name firm names, but it's still, you can still get that even at the C-level, that boutique approach. And I actually just went through this process for a C-level position recently, and we did talk to a lot of big firms, but one of them wasn't as big, and that was the one we went with, right? So certainly you can definitely consider them, the brand name recognition, sometimes that's what you need to get that role filled. So not sure if that quite answered your question, but talked definitely around it and gave some other ideas there.
Definitely. And I think we both touched on kind of that last bullet of brand alignment. I think we mentioned when I introduced you both, I know you both have worked at small and large companies, but it sounds like the candidate experience might be different working with a small boutique representing a smaller biotech versus bigger and bigger, if you will.
Actually, the only other thing, Kelly, that I think I neglected to mention that I would add to this is my very first question for the agency recruiter that maybe I haven't worked with before, and I could be screening for the first time, or maybe it's somebody that I have worked with before, but I don't know how strong they are in a given space. I must always ask right off the bat, how much experience do you have filling this role, and how often have you done it? How many times? With whom, in terms of other organizations, big, small, that question is really important to me, because I want to know that they're going to be successful, because it doesn't mean that, if they can't take that particular search on, it definitely doesn't make them a bad partner, but just they're not the right partner for that particular search.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Mm-hmm. And I guess, one question I might have too, I guess, is, I know I talk about my limited model and how I take on only so many clients, but is that something that you wonder from a customer perspective as well? As how many positions are they working on? You know, it's great, you know, to know if they've done it before, but I guess, is that something that you look for as well?
I would say yes, and
Yes.
I often ask that question. So let's just use clinical operations as an example, right? We're hiring a director of clin ops. How many active searches, not only have what's your expertise in your sweet spot and have you done this in the past and what other companies have you done it for, but how many are you actively recruiting for right now? Because if you're starting to build that relationship with the agency, you have no idea how they're going to play the cards and the candidates to you versus their other clients, right? So, and obviously agency fees come into play, and some people negotiate different fees. Other people don't negotiate the fee, and they may be paying a higher percentage than you might be paying, and where does that attention come into play? So for me, it's asking that how many are active at the same time as well.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Let's move to our next question. I chose a firm. How should I evaluate them during and after the search?
So for me, the number one, I tend to, if the search is going well, I don't tend to do a lot of during search evaluation because it's proving itself based on how many candidates we're getting and the flow is happening. But after the search, I always talk to the candidates about their experience with the agency. And on the employer side, I've had great experiences with agencies and bad experiences with agencies, as has every candidate, right? So I really want to hear from them what the agency did, how the agency proposed the offer to them, work through the compensation, all of that, because that's where it gets a little murky for candidates, is when you're doing the comp and so forth. And that to me is do we work with this agency again or not? Like, that's the hard line. If we start hearing bad feedback, it's nope, we're not going to work with that agency again, because it's, again, truly a reflection on the way I view it. They're an extension of our team, and I don't want our company to have that perception.
I actually use a certain set of phone interview questions when I speak with every candidate, and I want to say the very first question on there is, how did the candidate learn of this opportunity? If they say, you know, where they saw the role posted or whatever it is, but of course, if it's a candidate that comes through an agency partner, then they'll, you know, I'll know that piece already, but I will want to know kind of, oh, you heard about the position from Kelly, great. How has Kelly been to work with? You know, how has your experience been? How's the follow-up? With Kelly, I might be a little biased because I realize now when I ask this question, as I'm saying this out loud, I'll say, isn't she great? And I would probably say that before they've even had an opportunity to tell me what their feedback is. But in any event, I will ask throughout the process, even if the candidate flow is going well, I'll ask the candidate what their experience is. And then similar to you, Jody, I always kind of do a deep dive afterwards to see sort of how it went from kind of all perspectives, right? Like, how did the hiring manager feel? How did the new employee feel? Did the agency even get what they needed from us? Was the feedback timely? That sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I think on the other component of the during, how does the agency prepare the candidates? So there's that fine line where over preparing the candidates and giving them a script versus guiding them and directing them to certain information, or even how to pronounce the company's name, because some of these biotech companies, half of us can't pronounce the names. So from that perspective, just really how prepared is the candidate without being scripted and overly prepared is kind of another checkbox for me as the during aspect. And I have to say, I've been fortunate enough to work with Kelly over the past few years to fill quite a few positions. And we've had a candidate come, very rarely do we have a candidate that's not prepared, but there was this one instance where the candidate was not prepared, and our hiring manager was trying to have that reflect on the agency. However, another person on the interview team had come from G-Force, as G-Force represented them to us, and we hired them. And she's like, there is no way that agency did not prepare that candidate, because this is what I had to do for preparation, and they really held me accountable, and in a good way, not in a bad, too hard way. So for me, that's kind of, again, another during process checkbox to be able to validate.
And we all know we can prep a candidate and leave them to water, but sometimes, they have to do their research on their own too. And you're right, having them over scripted or over prepped it's hopefully not the goal, but they need to have a skin in the game too, as well. And sometimes candidates, you just can't control them.
Yes.
But that's their true self. So that's what we want anyway.
Yeah.
Right.
What about quantity of resumes or quality of resumes or candidate flow?
So I'm a big fan of quality over quantity. So I'd rather, if I'm paying an agency, definitely, I'd rather have basically interview ready candidates. We do a quick phone screen and that's it. They're going to the interview team versus agency screening, us screening, and kind of filtering through 50 resumes opposed to 5. So.
I totally agree. And I think sometimes to that point, you have to educate the hiring manager when you're in the middle of the search, because they are early on in the search, I should say, because they're looking for 10 or 15 resumes. And, you have to say, this isn't a good agency firm should not be sending that many resumes. They should just be sending their best, between 2 and 5 max. And as Jody said, they're interview ready and they're actually hireable candidates, right? And then you have to go through the process, of course. Are they a fit? Do they have the right skill set, and so on? But they could actually be hired by the organization.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. Well, good. Let's move on to the next question. What do you think candidates should expect from a firm you choose to partner with? So from a candidate side, if I'm a candidate and I'm the agency is calling me, I guess, what are you expecting the agency to give that candidate from the beginning, kind of middle, and end?
What I would like is the candidate to get exactly what they would get if they're speaking with somebody like myself internally, or they're speaking with the external recruiter, because that really shouldn't impact the candidate's experience. And I think if you take a little bit of time at the onset when you kick the search off with the search partner, then you can arm them with all of the information that you have, and then they're prepared to sort of go out there and represent the opportunity, the company, really kind of speak to all of the information that that we would speak to internally as well. I think one thing that's not my favorite is sort of that used car salesman approach, if you will. So there are recruiters out there, and that is their style. It doesn't, I don't know, it doesn't jive really well with mine or with me, and I just don't feel it's a great approach. So I think it's important to sort of find that partner that's kind of reflective of what's important to you.
Definitely agreed on the used car salesman approach there. So, which leads me to, from the candidate side, is they should not expect any pressure from the recruiting agency. Yes, the recruiters are representing the company, but they are also representing that candidate. And being in HR, that's the story of my life. I have to represent the company and I have to represent the employees, and I got to find that fine line to merge in the middle. And finding a partner that can do that is very important. I've had stories where literally someone's been on the team for 3 months and they're like, I really wanted to get paid this other salary, and the recruiter basically told me if I didn't accept this, I was crazy and they would never represent me again. And so kind of that threatening mechanism, that's not a great recruiting or agency partner at all. And then to me, it's just candidates tend to work with a great agency more than once, right? So when you're at an inflection point of your career and you're talking to candidates and you hear, oh yeah, I worked with G-Force for my last position. They helped me get that. And then they helped me get this other position, or whatever agency you're considering. That to me is a sign that you've picked a good agency partner as well, because they retain those candidates to come back when they're ready for their next role.
Mhm. Definitely. No one likes a used car salesman approach.
Not even when I'm buying a used car, mind you.
Good. And I guess in either of your cases, and I know I'm kind of adding this on here, but what do you expect from the agency when you're working through kind of the end of the process? Do you expect an agency to be fully hands-on and delivering offers and helping them debrief and negotiating, or would you rather an agency be more hands-off in that case and you kind of delivering that piece of things? Do either of you have an opinion on that piece?
I'm happy to chime in. It's a case-by-case basis for me, so candidate dependent. There are instances where candidates tend to want to get that offer from their hiring manager, and we know it's going to be, just from the conversations, you can tell that the hiring manager might be the better person to present the offer, or me internally. And then there's other cases where the agency is the better source to do that because of the relationship they have with the person and the trust level and so forth. So I kind of play it on a case-by-case basis, and it's never consistent.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know about you, Anita.
I would agree with all of that, actually. Ideally, in an ideal world, I would present the offer at the end, but it really varies. I think whoever has the best relationship, to your point, Jody, is the best person. And also that will make the best candidate experience as well, I think.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. And I think kind of adding to that, an agency that's flexible. We see both sides where someone says, no, we have to do it on our side. And then we see other people that say, we want you to do it and use us kind of on the flip side as well. I think that what's important when someone's picking an agency is someone that can be flexible in their process to allow that relationship that's specific to the candidate, to the position, and to who you're working with.
And I would say, to me, it's a flag if that agency is not flexible, because the agency's compensation is based off the employee's compensation. So if they're not flexible for that, it makes you wonder, what's happening? And if the agency consistently comes back with, oh, they want more money, that might be another flag that you need to pay attention to.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Good. Let's go on to our next question, which is a little bit more complicated. So how do I choose between contingent, co-tained, and retained? So before we kind of have you guys jump in, I know that some of these words are known in the industry and others are new. I'll just give a brief overview. So contingent, most know this one, right? It's very common. A firm will work on a position until a candidate is located, and then the fee is contingent on a completed search, an invoice on an employee's start date. And then retained, probably the next most common and well-known, is that a client retains a firm for the entire search and is paid in thirds based on deliverables until the end of the search. And then co-tained, which we are starting to see more of in the industry. Another word we've seen is contained or container. And that's where it's kind of a hybrid of both, where the client will pay an upfront non-refundable deposit that's paid on an estimated fee. And then the rest of the search is contingent on placing that candidate. So with those three to choose from, do either of you what do you recommend when someone's trying to choose between that type of contract?
I think it really depends on several different factors. And I guess I'll just preface this by saying when I was a headhunter, I've actually done sort of both retained and contingent. Co-tained is somewhat new, so I might be dating myself by saying this, but by the time co-tained has come along, I wasn't a headhunter any longer. And then on the client side, I've experienced all three, and I think timing is a big driver on this, how quickly you need the person. Retained can be just as important in terms of an approach as the other two, and sort of vice versa. I think the need of the search and the level of difficulty as well can sort of drive it, and then potentially how challenging it is to find this particular skill set, the supply and demand, I guess, of it as well.
I agree with everything you said, Anita. I would just also add, I tend to think of retained more at that C level, as we were talking about earlier, kind of what type of positions would you pick, the large firm versus a small firm. So I tend to utilize retained more at the C level and try to maintain contingent for other roles. I have not tried cotained yet, so maybe that will go on my bucket list of things to do soon. But certainly it's definitely the decision making to me, as well as that timeline. So it's all about time and market. I feel like a broken record, but keep saying the same thing. But.
And I know, Anita, you mentioned before when you've recommended company or agencies and how best to work with them, it might depend on if they've set up that internal HR team or if they've set up that internal talent acquisition team. I know that sometimes a smaller company or a stealth mode company might only have a couple department heads and not be kind of there yet. So I think you had mentioned that before, kind of recommending different things based on what the internal team has been set up or what the future, kind of how fast they're going to grow.
Definitely. Absolutely. Or if the internal team is assembled and just too small. I just was thinking of an example several years ago with a company, and many times, as we all know, I feel like the requisition, sort of the floodgates open January 2nd and everybody wants to fill their position right away. But the challenge with that, if you only have one recruiter, and Jody, you probably know this well, because I assume many times you're the sort of the one sole internal person. I was thinking about one organization where I worked at, and I remember it was January 2nd, first day back in the office one year, and we had 65 open positions. And my manager is sitting across the desk, and she's looking at me saying, well, what do you think that we should do? And I said, well, I definitely think we need another recruiter, and we need to think about our budget around agency spend and timing, because, I mean, there's just no way one person can hire 65 people sort of all at once. That becomes a very high requisition load, and the service level that you deliver at that point would not be, it's just not a good experience for the hiring team or the candidates.
Definitely. Well, let's go into kind of just I don't know, we all talked about kind of, words of wisdom and some stories. So before we jump into kind of the question and answer period, is there anything that you would kind of tell someone listening to kind of avoid or watch out for, or a story you had that might give them some words of wisdom when they're picking an agency?
Definitely. I think it's important to find out from the agency recruiter what other companies. I think as Cambridge and Boston has really built out and become sort of this biotech and pharma hub, really. I mean, I think we've really sort of gotten there in the past, I don't know how many years. So there's so many companies in the area, and it's important to know what other organizations that this particular firm partners with. And I think, just kind of being mindful of who are they going to be able to recruit from, because if they're recruiting from and working with everybody in the local market, well, then they might not have any resources for you. Or even if you've got a certain kind of couple of organizations that you target, and those are the companies that are your competition, for example, and they work with them already and they can't recruit from there, well, that's a helpful, that would also be really helpful to know as well.
I shared a lot of my words of wisdom throughout this past 45 minutes or so, but I agree with that, Anita, as well. The other aspect that we've got a lot of avoids up here on the screen, but one thing that stands out is that first one to me is I have had an instance where an agency has told a candidate that they're representing our company. We've never, ever engaged or even had a phone conversation with that company. And the way I found out was the agency we were working with was like, time out, this person said someone else already reached out to them. So I think just kind of being watchful of that. And when you have a good agency partner, that agency will come to you and say, listen, we ran into this, what's going on? And I think communication is really key with the agencies. And Anita, you touched on this a lot, it's seamless communication, constantly chatting as if you're sitting in the desk next to each other and making sure that process flow is happening, and constant feedback is key. So.
Mm-hmm.
Perfect. Well, we've got about 15 minutes left, which leads us right into a good amount of time for our question and answer. And I've got John Weber, who's the president of GeForce, that's going to help me out with some of those questions. John, do we have any good questions today?
Hi, everybody. Yeah, a couple of good questions have come in so far, and just going to go with where people have liked them, upvoted them. So here's the first one. There is an agency that I want to use, and their client list is impressive, but can they recruit from those clients? If they can't recruit there, and I hope they wouldn't be recruiting from us while working with us, how do I handle that?
And Anita, I think you already touched on this a little bit, but would you mind answering that one for us?
No, I don't mind at all. If they can't recruit from the companies that you want them to recruit from, unfortunately, they're not going to be the best agency partner for you. I know, because if you know how you feel, if you really want to work with that firm, but it's just, I feel like it's not going to be effective, unfortunately.
And how do you handle it, Anita? I guess like in the situation of maybe, when you're building out some of your teams and you see that, but you still want to work with that firm. Have you had to handle that in the past? It's a tricky one.
Trying to think of a specific, it's a great question, a very specific one, and I'm trying to think of an example off the top of my head where that has happened, and I think I just unfortunately didn't work with the firm. I think I had to find somebody else. That's hard though.
Yeah, I would suggest too, just if that firm meets all of my requirements that I've mentioned previously, you could even ask that firm, like, I can't partner with you on this search because of X, Y, and Z. Who else would you recommend that I reach out to? And that firm will not be like, nobody but us, if they've met all those other check boxes I've talked about through this webinar. So,
yeah, it's a hard decision to make, sounds like.
The power of referrals and recommendations.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay. Let's see here. Regarding choosing a firm, I went with a retained firm and it's not working out. Should I hire another and pay 2 fees?
Yeesh.
Anita, I'll have you start with that one too.
I was going to say, I've been there as well. It's not fun.
That is not fun. Oh, gracious. Jody, what were you going to say? I mean, I have some thoughts, but.
Yeah, again, clearly at the onset, the diligence wasn't done from the beginning appropriately to partner with that agency. So for me, it's a matter of kind of working with that agency a little bit to course correct, and then kind of a negotiation at the end. So hopefully you're not going to have to pay 2 full fees. Hopefully that agency will come to light and be like, you know what, you're right, we can't do this. We won't charge you that last third or whatever, wherever you are from the fee structure perspective. But it's not fun, and sometimes you do just have to swallow that bullet, unfortunately.
The only other thing I think of here that I think I would add is, Jody, to your point, if you hadn't paid out all of the fee with the first firm, and hopefully you can try to negotiate some money back in the end if you have. But the other thing is, maybe you have a credit with that firm. So in the future, if there's a position that might be more in their wheelhouse, maybe you have some type of agreement where you go back to them at that point, and then they sort of recognize what you've already paid to them. That can be a little sticky. But that's the only other thing that I could think of. But to pay 2 fees is lousy. That's lousy for sure.
And I do, on that credit topic, I've actually been in that instance, not that the firm couldn't fill the position, and it was a smaller boutique retained search firm that I was working with at the time. But we stopped recruiting for the position because we realized we weren't, through the interview process, realized maybe this isn't the role we need, maybe it's something else. And they actually gave us a credit they volunteered a credit to the next search that we would open with them because we stopped the search, which they didn't need to do. So some of them are actually, you may not think of it when you're reading their contracts, but some of them are actually pretty reasonable to be able to work with you in that instance as well. I know that wasn't the double fee, but the credit comment you made me think of that. So.
Mm-hmm. And any good firm, I think, realizes that it's not this one placement, it's a long-term relationship. Kelly and I have worked together now, I'm counting off the top of my head, at least 4 different organizations. And we did have at one company where we had some challenges and we stopped recruiting on that particular position. And it was not a reflection on Kelly or the firm at all. And they did every single thing that they could have done. It was more kind of driven by internal initiatives and kind of internal needs. And so Kelly was amazing about it and didn't, make a big thing, and knows that, again, I'm at another organization, I'll take her with me there as well. So I think it's, that long-term relationship versus that quick one hit, one placement. And if that firm really just wants that one fee, probably not the firm for you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Definitely good point.
Great questions, everybody, and great answers. What should I do if I think a firm that I'm working with isn't making me a priority?
We're feeling the pain. So for me, again, I don't sugarcoat when I communicate in tough situations. So I would obviously just go approach the firm and say, I'm not pleased with the performance. We want more traction. What's going on? I do ask questions like, is it the market? What else is on your plate? But the end of my message is like, either I'm a priority or we're moving on. Easier said in a contingent search than a retained, obviously, but it's definitely, again, back to that communication piece.
And if to that point with respect to communication, if you don't already have weekly one-on-ones with the firm, I would definitely implement that. And I would have a lot of questions too. As Jody said, I would be direct with the feedback. I mean, you can be direct and diplomatic and professional, that's fine, but let them know how you feel for sure. And anything like a weekly one-on-one or a spreadsheet, maybe they're tracking their activity in Excel. And even if it's candidates they can't get over the finish line to you, I would want to see some data. I mean, it's a data-driven industry, this biotech industry and pharma where we work. So I would want to see, maybe they'll share this with you, maybe they won't, but I would want to know how many calls are they making? What's the response rate? How are they reaching out to candidates? And you're not looking for their secret sauce necessarily, but if they were performing, you wouldn't even have these questions. So I think to really kind of implement a QC sort of initiative or process, that's what I would recommend. That's what I've done in the past.
Definitely. Weekly check-ins are always a good idea. Otherwise, they start hiding on you.
Absolutely. Okay, here's another one. Should I use 2 firms at once? Will that get me faster results?
I can jump in there because I'm up until very recently been a one firm only, because the traction that firm might be getting could be impeded by the other firm coming through. So, and I also the candidate experience side, right? So what if that candidate is in the network of both firms and both firms reach out? However, in this market, I've started to explore the option of potentially using 2 firms for certain positions. And again, to do that, though, I've done a lot of diligence around what is your network, where are you reaching out to hopefully prevent that candidate experience by being hit with 2 recruiter calls from this one company versus just one. We all have to keep in mind every candidate is likely receiving 10 unsolicited emails or phone calls a day. I was actually couldn't figure out how this one agency got my phone number. And I'm like, how did you even get my phone number? Like, it was my cell phone and I don't list that anywhere. And I'm like, how did you get my cell phone number? And they revealed to me how they got my cell phone number. And I'm like, oh my God, that's genius. So now I've started doing that when I'm reaching out to candidates on our own. But it's certainly, the candidate experience to me is number one priority. So if you're sure that the two firms are not going to collide, then, and the position is a tough to fill one, it may warrant a second firm. But Anita, you're coming from both sides of this, so.
I try not to, for the reason that you alluded to, Jody, with respect to one candidate getting calls from multiple different people. If you're working with the right firm, you should be okay. But I have had instances where I've had two firms on one position. I would never do more than two, because then people are really tripping over one another and it gets messy and it gets even challenging to even track where the submissions came in from. My ideal situation is just one kind of partner. And frankly, it makes it easier, maybe selfishly, I guess, but it also makes it easier for me to track. So if I've picked the right partner, then I can just kind of devote my time to interacting with that search firm and the hiring manager and the candidates. And I just think it doesn't spread you too thin.
Yeah. Yeah, like I said, up until very recently, it's always been just one firm. But.
This market is kind of, I think a lot of us are doing things that perhaps, I don't know how many times in the past probably year I've said in 25 years I've not seen this, whatever this is, and that insert the blank. Yeah. But it's a very different market than I think many of us that have been doing this for a long time have seen.
Yeah. Definitely. Well, it sounds like we've got maybe time for one more question, John.
Yeah, and I agree with that sentiment, Anita, as well. Yeah, last question, I think, before we wrap it up here. How long can I expect a search firm to find me candidates? How long will it take?
Oh, how long will it take? I see. I always say it, I don't know, Jody, how you feel. I always say it takes between 2 to 4 weeks. And again, this might be position specific, kind of on a case-by-case basis. But what I always say for myself is to the hiring manager, just give me 2 to 4 weeks to build up a pool for you. And by that point, I should definitely have some candidates pulled together. And remember, you don't want to get, you don't need 80 resumes or 50 or 10. You just need 3 really good ones. Right. And allow the partner the time to kind of pull those together and really do their due diligence.
Yep, I would agree with that as well. The pressure is the hiring manager side, where they think we can turn up 10 candidates in 5 days, and you're
Yes.
like, no. So I always, from the intake perspective with the hiring managers, is 90 days time to fill. We'll hit it. Your first resumes, to your point, is 2 to 4 weeks out. So sit tight. Enjoy the ride.
Sometimes that's just educating them, though, right, Jody? Like, I feel
That's
like they sort of
education.
They sort of envision a faucet. You turn the faucet on, the water comes out, but it doesn't work that way with candidates.
I wish it worked that way.
It's posted on our website. Why don't we have? Well, we did receive 100 resumes. Do you want the accounts payable person that applied for your director of clinical ops position, or like, what do you want?
Probably not.
Well, perfect. Well, I'll wrap it up here. Just a couple minutes under 1 o'clock Eastern. I think it's been a really good session, some really great questions. Thank you all for attending, and a really special thank you, Jody and Anita, for taking the time to help us educate everyone on how best to choose an agency partner. Have a great day, and my information is up here if anyone has any questions. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you. Bye, everyone.